Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here with the amazing psychic Liz Cross. How are you doing this afternoon?
Oh, great. I'm so excited about this probe.
I am too. So we have a friend with us, Mr. Alan Watts. He's a famous British philosopher back in the 60s and 70s. He's very popular for bringing Eastern religions to Western religions. And if you ever want to listen to some great audio, go on YouTube and look him up. I've listened to thousands of hours of him. He has a great voice, and he's just kind of has one of those mesmerizing narrative kind of draws. So I highly recommend it. How's he doing today?
He is so happy to be here.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to do the consciousness probe today. I have a feeling this is not going to be the first consciousness probe we do, and we're definitely going to make a part one, part two here. But it's such a vast topic. There's so many different ways we can go with this. But this is going to start off with listener questions for sure. And then we'll probably go off into the weeds as we get information, as we usually do on a tangent. So let's start off with the first question, which is a pretty deep question. So is consciousness actually the soul?
No,
Okay, so when we say consciousness, we should probably define consciousness in the beginning. That would be a good thing to do, to at least get some sort of, where are we starting from? So let's bring in Mr. Watts, and let's ask from our perspective here on the Earth plane, what is consciousness?
it's a state of being. Now, that's what Alan Watts says. And
Oh,
I understand that, but I actually came up with my own definition of consciousness, which we will probably get into in part two of the video. But my definition is consciousness in its purest form is energy that is aware and wants to sustain itself.
right. So it's consciousness is aware of itself, its existence, its own
Right.
existence. So, but there's consciousness that exists that may not be aware of its own existence. For instance, let's give an example. What about like an animal that lives, or even like a rock, right? Is the rock aware of its own existence? We know inanimate things have consciousness to some degree.
They do. So let's ask. I'll grab a rock and I'll say, "Are you aware that you have consciousness?" Yes.
Okay, what about like animals, like a fish? Is it aware that it's conscious of itself?
Are you aware that you are conscious of yourself? No. It's aware of survival.
Right. That's what I thought we were gonna get. So that's is that it?
I
Is,
see what you're saying because Alan Watts is saying it's a state of being, right?
Mhm.
And then I'm saying it's aware and wants to sustain itself. But at some level, that fish is aware because it wants to survive, right?
Right. Yes. Exactly.
So where do we go from here? I don't know. End of video. Good night, folks. Show's
That
over.
was quick. Well, I mean, I've always thought of it as different levels of consciousness. I think that's what most people would think. It's not that the animals are like, they don't have a soul. Well, I don't know if they have a soul, but they, in terms of consciousness, it's just a different level. Like we graduate up the levels. Like we were, as we know from CTT sessions, we were once fish, we were once birds. And so we had to graduate up the ladder of consciousness in order to get to where we are. So it's like there's like a macrocosm and a microcosm. Like, so for what we just got there was, so that in your definition of consciousness, there's the being aware of itself and also sustaining that consciousness, like the energy of the consciousness. And for the fish, it can't see that, but it still has that at a lower level, the urge to sustain itself in the physical form, which is still energy. So it's like, it's just like, I feel there's like lower levels that you graduate up.
But even the fish has a soul, right? So don't forget, each being, living being, has at least three different levels of consciousness within the being. So there's the soul consciousness, right? There's the subconscious, and then there's the conscious mind. So when I tap into the fish and say, "Are you aware of yourself?" and it says no, but I think that there is an awareness there. It's just not on the same level of awareness that we have as humans, because it has to be somewhat aware of itself and its parameters in order to survive. And I'm saying, but am I tapping into, so if I tap into the soul consciousness of the fish, are you aware? And yes, absolutely, it's aware of itself.
Right. Okay. So I think we can establish then that there's two separate consciousness. There's like the higher self, if you will, and then there's like the consciousness that we have here that makes up the subconscious and the conscious and the physical realm. So,
Ah, but the
so
subconscious and the conscious are very separate,
right,
right?
right. But they're still only present on the earth plane.
So let's ask, that's a good question. Does the subconscious go with the soul? No, that was a very good question. Okay, good point, Mr. Photon. No, the subconscious and the conscious mind, they are left on the earth plane only, emotions that are attached to the soul. So are we saying that emotions attached to the subconscious and that are fed back into the soul about certain events, people, places, things, how we feel about things? Now, those are imprinted on the soul memory, and those are by way of contracts anyway. Now, those are taken into the spirit world.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because that information obviously gets transferred, right? So we have you're there processing all this information from the lifetime so you can plan your future lifetime. So that's useful data, if you will, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Okay. All right. Let's get back to to the listener questions. We probably go on that forever. We'll never get to the listener questions. All right. Next up, there's a bunch of them here. Number one, is consciousness made up of more than one component? We got that. Okay, we answered that question. Sorry, going through this. How is the imagination related / connected to consciousness?
How is the imagination related or attached to consciousness? Now that's the conscious mind. Okay, what I'm getting from Watts is that is like earth plane consciousness. Do we not imagine in the spirit realm? No, no,
Oh,
there's no need to.
well, see, that's one of those things where looking down from the spirit world, you're like, oh, I wish I had imagination right now, right? That's one of those superpowers that we have here, probably looking down.
Let's ask him, do you miss having imagination in the spirit world? No, it's unnecessary. You don't
Oh,
need it, because
all
you
right.
can build and create whatever and imagine. You can create whatever it is you want to. So imagination is unnecessary, but it is attached to the conscious mind here on the earth plane. Why is imagination such a thing here? It's a form of escape.
Oh, really?
It, yeah. So what do you mean it's a form of escape? It's also like fantasy. Um, Imagination and fantasy, are they the same thing? No, because you can imagine different scenarios, right?
Mhm.
Um, Fantasizing, is that like is that date? See, I've always gotten this about fantasizing. That fantasizing is like a tool of the dark. So you can imagine different scenarios and possibilities, but when it comes into fantasizing, then that's different. Now I'm asking him, what's the difference between fantasizing and imagination? And this is so interesting to me. Sorry if it's not to anybody else. Um, It's about the dopamine. So fantasizing, it brings about a certain feel good chemicals or chemical in the brain, dopamine, excitotoxins in the brain, right? Excitochemicals. Whereas imagination doesn't bring about those same feelings. It's just, well, this is a different scenario, that's a different scenario, right? So those are two very different things. Fantasizing is actually very dangerous because people can become addicted to fantasizing.
Hmm. Okay, that make I can follow that. But what I was thinking of it is, if you're an inventor, if you're a creative person that's writing stories or narratives, or you're a painter, a lot of those seeds will start in your imagination at first. So, am I maybe defining my terms wrong, or is that not the case?
Let's sorry, let's ask. So when people are inventing things, is that from born out of imagination? No, he says that's born out of an idea. So an idea and imagination, that he says are two totally separate things.
Ah, okay. All right. That clears it up for me. I was thinking of ideas. All right. Okay, moving on. Um, is is there a universal or central consciousness?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so that's source, right?
Is it source? Yes. Well, he calls it the highest power.
All right. The highest power. All right. Is personal slash individual consciousness separate from the highest power?
Is personal or individual consciousness separate from the highest power? He says yes and no. So we're all ultimately connected via consciousness, energy to the highest power, but then we also have our individual consciousness that is sort of connected to source consciousness, but they overlap, right? You know how you have two circles and you kind of have the circles sort of, meshed into one another, and they're overlapping, but we have a separate consciousness to source consciousness, which is, he says, it's more idealistic.
Oh, okay. That's idealistic from our point of view.
Yes, not from source's point of view.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. All right. What happens to an individual's consciousness when we pass on to the spirit world? Is it completely obliterated and we just have the information carry on?
What happens to the individual consciousness when we go to the spirit world? It's dissolved. The energy is dissolved here on the earth plane because there's no longer a body to sustain that individual consciousness.
So when that energy gets dissolved, quote unquote, does that energy just move on to something else? Does the fourth law of thermodynamics hold true?
Does that energy move on to something else? Yes, it splits apart into millions and millions and millions of pieces, and it attaches itself to somewhere else.
Somewhere else or something else?
Something, both. It could be something or somewhere. It depends, like that, those aspects of the consciousness, what they are attracted to magnetically.
Interesting. Is there a particular reason? Like if you had, I don't know, negative thoughts, would they get dissolved? That attracts to something negative?
It goes to something negative. So if you have a negative aspect in your consciousness, that will go and stick to, other negative aspects that could be floating around in an individual or in an area or in an idea, a thought form. It just depends what it needs, what it aligns with. It's almost like a blueprint, he's telling me. Consciousness is a blueprint. Does everybody, are there any two consciousnesses that are alike? No. Each consciousness is individual as DNA itself.
Wow, that's pretty
Now,
cool.
I did not know that.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Okay. And then it's always the conscious. So what's it's also blowing my mind that your consciousness when it dissolves, it like blobs off to like another, like for instance, if we're thinking of I'm thinking this big picture, like there's a fight for light and dark, right? And so there's like the light entity and the dark entity, right, going at it, right? So part of your psyche is like sectioned off and it like floats over to like the dark energy and supports that, and part of your floats off to like the light side. Is that kind of what happens in a simplistic way?
It is, but he's describing it more like interlocking. So it automatically is pre programmed on a very advanced mathematical level to interlock to different levels of consciousness, to other consciousness. So can we go ahead and say that the basic form of energy is consciousness? And he says absolutely.
Hmm.
That is the basic form of energy, and the
Like
consciousness builds.
so in the universe, in our universe right now, like the physical universe, the energy of consciousness is like the foundation and underlying energy of everything.
Absolutely.
Okay, so when we say, oh, intention is everything, it really is, right?
When we say intention, everything. Exactly that.
And
Right.
everything that we create in the physical world, it starts as an idea, I guess, right? So that's that consciousness energy. So there's nothing you see before you that didn't start off as consciousness energy. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, with the idea, that is a state of consciousness, but how that becomes into like a reality is you have to attach more energy to it, and it builds over time, right? So, say you have an idea, and now you're like, how am I going to put this idea into into an intention? So turning an idea into an intention, um, this is what I intend to do with this information. And now you're throwing energy at it, right? And you're making it into something physical. So say you have an idea for, I don't know, say a hydropowered car, right?
Mhm.
And you have this idea, but there's no intention behind that idea. Now it's up to you to take the conscious decision of what you're going to do with that idea. And now you're going to put energy towards that idea and bring that idea into physical being. Now, that idea also grows in consciousness as well.
Right. And I'm sure there's like an energy barrier that energetically prevents you from like bringing everything you think of into existence. Right. So, for instance, like, oh, I want $1 million. Well, you're going to have to overcome a lot of energy barriers in order to manifest that or make that a reality.
And also, it has to be in the soul contract, right?
Well, yeah, that's right too. But maybe that's okay. We can ask this. Is that like the barrier, like the energetic barrier? Is that what keeps the soul contracts in place? Those energetic barriers?
Well, he calls them energetic structures. And
Oh.
I'm saying, does the soul contract, does each soul contract, so like me and Mr. Photon, we have a soul contract, right? Because obviously we're doing this, right? Everybody you come into contact with, you have a soul contract with. Does that have a consciousness? He says no. He says it's about two individuals creating a contract, but you still hold on to your separate consciousness, so it doesn't become a one consciousness. No, but then I'm not married to Mr. Photon, uh, uh, you know. And so, what about if because I'm married to my husband? Does that contract become a one individual consciousness? He's saying no. So, even within the soul contract, there's two very separate consciousness. What about mother and child. No, he's saying two separate. So I don't know. What is the
Interesting.
energy in the soul contract? How come it doesn't have its own consciousness? Because of the energetic barriers, it's not allowed to have an individual consciousness because the soul contract is to do exactly what it says on the paper, right? It
Okay.
doesn't go beyond that. It doesn't go below that. It is, exactly put in place to do what it says on the tin, right? Um, and you can't formulate. It's not allowed to have a separate consciousness because if it did, then that consciousness would want to survive and live beyond the soul contract, and you can't have that because when certain soul contracts are finished, they're done. You don't need the consciousness of that soul contract wanting to keep the two individuals together when what's done is done. Oh my God, that makes so much sense.
Well, it does, even in the context of your definition of consciousness being it's aware of itself and it has the need to um keep it going. So if it had those two qualities, it wouldn't want to end. It wouldn't want to stick to like it wouldn't be a contract anymore. It would be, oh, we're going to change this over here. And we're going to change that over here. Oh, yeah, no, I'm not going to ever end. It's actually going to be a continuous contract for eternity. So it makes sense.
So it's not allowed to have a consciousness.
Right. Okay. Off on a tangent, but a fun one. All right. So next question is, what is Christ consciousness?
Oh, oh my gosh. I think
Yeah.
this is going to be parts 1 through 10.
Yeah, I think so at this pace.
What is Christ consciousness? Now, that's the idea he's saying to me. That's the idea that there's something greater than ourselves, but it's taken on the form of Christ, right? That's a representation of source. So
Right. So yeah, but the Christ isn't necessarily referring to the person that people would call Jesus, right? That's like an entity that would gave consciousness to the person we call Jesus. Is that correct, or am I off?
So it originated with the idea of Christ consciousness because we needed an example to be put in human terms, right? There was no point God just giving information to man. And as we got in that other probe, we needed proof. We were getting tired of no proof. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. There's nothing happening here. There's no proof. How do we know that this is working, right? So then we have this figure, Jesus Christ, that had to be put into human terms in order to understand what is believed as the love of God, right? So we had to have some sort of shining example. So from this figure, Jesus Christ, we developed this idea or thought form, or even some people a state of being of Christ consciousness.
Hmm. So it's not that. So, well, I guess what I was trying to say is what is the Christ consciousness, the consciousness that came into the person we call Jesus, like the Christ became Jesus. Is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, as in like the consciousness of God came into, okay.
And that's what it is. Like that's what I was trying to ask or say.
Oh no, you're doing a great job. So is that what happened? No.
Okay.
He's saying that what happened was you had an individual consciousness that connected to source consciousness and tried to bring down his idea of source consciousness to the people. But it's not exactly, is it close to source? I mean, it's close, but it isn't exact to source consciousness.
Kind of coming
Because,
through a filter.
right, he's still, at the end of the day, he was still a human being.
Right.
Humans are flawed. We're not perfect beings by any stretch of the imagination. We're We're meant to be imperfect beings. We're meant to be in an imperfect world. In our eyes, it's imperfect. In Source's eyes, it's absolutely doing the job it's supposed to be doing, right?
Right. Yeah, and I mean that was that built in, like the filter was supposed to be there so that it can relate to us on a human level as well.
Exactly. He says, yes, it needed to be relatable on this level because we were tired of being given and his own personal thoughts, feelings, and opinions, stone tablets and things with no real proof of existence. We're getting messages from all these different areas and different, various messages that were coming through, but there was no physical proof. And this is when people started to question, like, you know, are we actually receiving messages from Source himself, or are we just receiving it from, God knows who, right? So that's why they wanted the physical proof. But
Right.
even when the proof was on the earth plane, now I'm not saying I'm for or against because, that's a whole other video, 10, 20, 30 videos. But even when some, and there's been many times that proof has been on the earth plane of God's presence. But then he just said to me, humans are in such disbelief of it, they immediately reject it. So,
Yeah, isn't it not the case that you can look around and see like miracles everywhere, right? Which is we don't have eyes to see it.
right, exactly. And it's like our consciousness is not a source equipped, in his own words, to understand what miracles actually are, right? These are still human perceptions of miracles. Now, anybody that's ever had a child, right, that is a absolute miracle in itself. And is that supposed to be one of Source's miracles? And he says, no, that's just the story of man. That's the way of life. And so it's also the definition of a miracle as well. Do miracles have their own consciousness? Yes, they do. And
Huh.
miracle consciousness, he's telling me, are derivatives from the angelic beings, like the angelic realm. They're the ones that create absolute miracles. So this
Uh,
is about removing people from dangerous situations, saving people, helping them in that way. Those are miracles, and
okay.
according to him. And
Okay.
don't forget, he was a human on the earth plane.
Right. For sure. So it's coming through his filter when he was here to some degree, anyways, I'm sure. Okay. Is there such thing as cosmic consciousness?
He says no, it's more to do with universal consciousness.
Okay. So maybe that's what they mean. Universal consciousness. So is that just source?
No, that's a collective of everybody.
Okay, so all conscious beings in this universe, that's universal consciousness.
All conscious beings in the universe. Is that universal? Yes.
And what
Every
is,
single thing. Is that including living and non-living? Yes, that includes living and non-living
oh boy.
objects.
Okay. All right. So are we always tapped into that at all times as humans?
Are we always tapped into that at all times? No, some people are devoid of being able to tap into that.
Oh, interesting. So is that just the level of consciousness that they're currently at in this incarnation?
Yes, they've almost like shut off that part of their consciousness on purpose.
Huh. Okay. So as you move up the incarnation level and move towards ascension, you're more connected to the universal consciousness.
Not necessarily. I'm saying, is the universal consciousness, is that aligned with empathy? He's saying no. It's about where you fit in. It's about a sense of purpose, where you fit in on the earth plane, in the universe, your individual job. Um, what you're doing with it, with this sense of purpose,
Well,
right?
that sounds like a big weight to have on your shoulders. So I can understand why some beings would want to shut it off if I have to consider the entire, gravity of everything living and non-living and where I fit into that.
And a lot of people are, I get this is a very, very popular question that I get. What is my purpose, Liz? What is my purpose? Well, oftentimes people are looking outside of themselves for their sense of purpose. And every single time, the sense of purpose is located on the inside, not on the outside,
Mm,
right? So once you find that sense of purpose on the inside, now you can make more of a commitment to the outside world. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to go feed the homeless, that's my sense of purpose. Yes, but you could be so busy feeding the homeless that you've completely used it as an escape to figure out what your real sense of purpose is. And usually the sense of purpose goes back to self-love, self-worth, deserving, you know, being humble, things like that. It just depends on the individual. But usually, every time somebody asks me that question, the sense of purpose is not on the exterior.
So maybe bringing it full circle back to the oh my God, I'm losing my brain now. The idea of imagination, right? So if someone is putting their self-worth outside of themselves, they're using their imagination instead of looking within. See where I'm going with that? Or am I crazy?
Um, don't quit your day job. No, I'm teasing. Um, no, big. It's not necessarily imagination, but a lot of times I see what you're saying because a lot of times people imagine these ideologues or these idealistic lives of, I'm just going to be of service, right? So
Yeah.
I'm just going, they imagine that. And then they're sitting in the same room every day, day in and day out, and nothing's happening. And they believe that that sense of purpose is like going out and doing this and doing that. I need to manifest $1 billion so I can give it all away. Okay, guess what's not going to happen, right? Because now you're going to interfere with, loads and loads, a whole multitude of soul contracts where people wrote it into their soul contracts or their existing lifetimes to be poor, right? So you throwing money at a problem is not going to be the answer. It's
Right.
not. And a lot of people sit there using that imagination, but see, there's a fine line, because then that imagination, when nothing is happening, they're not doing anything to manifest this energetically. They're not going out, they're not doing anything, right? They're still sitting in the room. Now that becomes, it crosses over into fantasy thinking, and fantasy thinking then becomes this form of escape. And then they start, trying to, live this fantasy life. Now they're buying things and for this fantasy life. Now it's almost like they're clinging on to the fantasy because the fantasy is so much more than just normal living. So that's how that sort of imagination crosses over. Imagination to me, I'm getting, is just basically scenarios. Like, imagine this scenario and how you would react. It's almost like the brain's way of prepping you for different scenarios. That's what I'm getting very strongly.
So it's fear-based probably a lot of the time.
Is imagination fear based? Absolutely it is.
Yeah. Okay. I see it now. I think the definitions in my head need some reworking because I'm like connecting imagination with, oh, imagination. I'm gonna go paint a painting, right? Or I'm gonna use my imagination to do. But really that's if that's an idea, then I need to stop using that terminology to describe that. Imagination sounds like it's more like, oh my God, how is this? How am I gonna face this hard test at school and I'm not going to be able to solve this, whatever, and answer this question. Oh my God. And you're thinking of all these things that never come true.
Exactly. So it's like these different scenarios, it's almost like when you are, especially in a confrontational sort of,
Right. Yeah.
you're anticipating a confrontation with
Yeah.
somebody. I'm now going to imagine 10 different ways to tell them that, I don't like their dress or what,
Right.
something
Yeah.
stupid, but, and right, it never really ever materializes. It usually goes off a lot better than what the worst case scenario than what you ever imagined, right?
Yeah.
That's what imagination is. Fantasy is something extremely different. It's like, I don't want to be here. So my consciousness is now being transported somewhere else, even though my physical body is not, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I think we have to end part one now, and we will continue part two for our members. We may have to do part three, part four, honestly, at this pace, because we're not even past the first couple people asking questions here. So if you want to see the rest of this video, or you want to participate in these probes and have questions being asked and all these wonderful topics that everybody dreams up, then you need to become a Patreon member. How do they do that, Liz?
They go to patreon.com/remote viewing and beyond. And don't forget, right? Liz, I don't want crypto information. I don't want this. I don't want that. Yes, but you also get the CTT, which is the consciousness transformation techniques. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, if you're not in that group, you are missing out, right? We are powerful. We're going places. We're transforming our consciousness, expanding our consciousness. We're letting go of the dark and embracing the light. I mean, you can feel the processing in real time as we're moving through the group work, right? And it's never a dull moment. We learn so much in there. So if you're interested in consciousness, then I would really encourage you to come to the CTT group, which is part of the Patreon membership. We meet every Monday morning, 9 a.m. Central. And really, it's like people are addicted to the CTT. They don't dare miss it. I got people that stay up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning on the other side of the world, and they refuse to miss the CTT. That's how important.
I don't miss it. I'm there every Monday, so.
Exactly. Exactly. It's so powerful. It's such an amazing tool. I'm very fortunate to have that tool in my box. So yes, do come join us, patreon.com/remote viewing and beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you.